Good morning. We are here today to discuss Parshas Bo, and we are now in the month of Shvat. And the title for today's class is By Your Identity You Will Live. This month, the month of Shvat, is sponsored by Rabbi Aharon and Becky Asarath in the merit of a Refu'ah Shalema for Baruch, Yehoshua, Yisrael, ben Sima. These are dear friends of the yeshiva. We definitely daven for Refu'ah Shalema, and it is an honor to know such a wonderful family that does so much for our community. So definitely join them in wishing Baruch, Yehoshua, Yisrael ben Sima, speedy Refu'ah Shalema. This week's class is dedicated also for Refu'ah Shalema, for Baruch, Yehoshua, Yisrael ben Sima, as we mentioned, Perel, Sasha, bas Meril, Rivka, Shlomo ben Baila, and Moshe ben Simcha. This week's class is also dedicated to the memory of Yehoshua ben Tzvi Nechemia. May his neshama have an aliya. This is a father of one of our rabbeim, and his passing was just this past week. And we wish the whole mishpacha a neshama, makom yanachim eschem b'soch sha'avei le'tzion v'Yerushalayim. So there's a ton, as we know, going on in the world, and certainly President Trump is pushing a lot of agendas. Over the last few weeks, we've seen the capture of Maduro from Venezuela. We've seen a major demonstration and protestation in Iran against the current regime. And as we know, there is a lot of military planning and strategizing happening as we speak. What the outcomes will be, very hard to tell. In addition to that, there's the whole quest for Greenland that apparently our president is interested in acquiring somehow. And with all the chaos in the world, there is so much to contemplate. Today, as I mentioned, the title is going to be By Your Identity You Will Live. We're going to talk about the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim from the perspective of identity. What is liberation really all about? And how does that pertain to what's happening in the world at large in terms of toppling dictators and changing regimes, etc. The opening of the Parsha, interestingly enough, we have the servants of Paro speaking up pretty emphatically to their dictator and quite insistent in their demand that Paro should let these Jews go already. How long will this continue to be for us a stumbling block? Moshe and Aaron had just come to warn Paro about the 8th plague, the plague of locusts, and that it would be devastating for Egypt if the Jews were not let go. And that's indeed what the servants are complaining to Paro, insisting that he bring Moshe and Aaron back and let the people go. So Paro brings them back, and they have a conversation, and Paro asks Moshe Rabbeinu, okay, who is going to go on this expedition to the desert to bring offerings to God that you're requesting to serve him? And Moshe says, oh, our youths, our elders, everyone's going to go. And Paro says, no, only the men need to go. And therefore, I think you have nefarious intentions. And essentially, you're not allowed to go. And at that point, Moshe is driven out from his audience with Paro. And what's quite surprising, even astonishing, is that the servants say nothing. So just earlier, the sentences had recorded how the servants are insistent that you need to let these Jewish people go, because don't you know that Egypt is lost if you let them, if you insist on them staying and not letting them go? So the locusts are going to come and everything will be destroyed. Let them go. Paro asks basically this one question: who's going to go? Moshe says everybody's going to go. Paro says no, only the men can go. And suddenly, it's as if the servants have fallen into complete silence and they are mute on the matter. And the question is why? Why would the servants no longer insist that the Jewish people be let go because of the imminent destruction of Egypt? Now, another good general question on the Parsha is the whole notion of the great wealth that the Jewish people ask from the Egyptians, from their neighbors, and are indeed given by the Egyptians prior to their leaving after the plague of the firstborn. So the question is very simple. Hashem promised to Abraham that after this enslavement in a country that is not theirs, the Jewish people will leave with rechush gadol, with a tremendous wealth. And the question is, why is tremendous wealth necessary? That's part A of the question. Okay, very nice. You want them to have money. Okay, but is that a necessary part of the redemption? God can make money rain down from heaven. Or do they really need to leave Egypt with money? But even more than that is, according to the Midrash, the Jewish people during the plague of darkness saw where all their treasures were, but they did not take it then. They left it there. Well, if you're going to leave with great wealth, just take it then. And if you're going to say, well, we want the Egyptians to actually willingly give the Jews the money, well, that's a miracle anyways. So Hashem can just program the Egyptians with this insatiable desire to give away all their money to the Jewish people, and it can happen that way. But instead, the construct is that the Jewish people need to go ask for their money. Hashem even says, please, please go ask for their money, because I made this promise to Abraham. At least Chazal say that Hashem said, please, because I want to fulfill the promise to Abraham. There are so many ways to fulfill the promise to Abraham. Money can rain down from heaven, which, by the way, according to the Midrash, with the man came very precious gems. And it doesn't need to be with the man. It could be at any point. And also, the Jewish people could just get the money because the Egyptians give it to them. And in addition to that, they got a tremendous wealth at the splitting of the Red Sea. After the drowning of the Egyptians in the Red Sea, there was an enormous amount of gems, jewels, money that washed up on the shore. And we know that that was even greater than what they took from Egypt. So there's so many ways that this promise can be fulfilled. Why is the construct that the Jewish people need to ask and specifically not take it and not in any other fashion? Another question, which is, give me 1 second, my apologies. Yeah, another question is as follows, and this is really a kind of a few parts, this question. It's important to know the whole kind of backstory. So it's now after the plague of darkness, and apparently, at least according to one opinion in Chazal, many of the Jews have died because they died in the plague of darkness. And now it's time for the plague of the firstborn. And Hashem tells Moshe to warn Paro that the plague of the firstborn is going to happen. And again, Paro's not going to listen, but go tell him. And they do so. Then Hashem instructs Moshe and Aharon regarding the new month. And he also says to them, look, tell the Jewish people, the new month we're talking about is the month of Nisan. And now he says, tell the Jewish people that on the 10th of this month, you shall take for yourself a sheep, a goat or a lamb. In this case, it seems like it's a sheep. And they should ultimately slaughter it as the Paschal lamb with the blood on the lintels and on the doorpost, etc. Now, the way the Torah expresses this commandment is that it should be for you for safekeeping. In Hebrew, v'haya lachem lemishmeres. It should be for you for a guarding or a safekeeping ad arba asar yom hachodesh, until the 14th of the month. So we know that they slaughter that on the 14th day. That night, which is the night of the 15th, is when the Jewish people eat it, and it's that night that the plague of the firstborn happens, and it's the next morning, that day by day, that the Jewish people leave. That's the process. So, an interesting point, truly an anomaly, as Rashi is here commenting. In general, when it comes to the Pesach offering, which we do annually from the time that the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, there was no obligation to take this sheep or this lamb 4 days before its slaughter. there was only a commandment to take it. And as long as you did it by the appointed time, essentially midday on Erev Pesach, which is the 14th of Nisan, so you could do your obligation. So Rashi asks the question, why did the Jews here in Egypt need to take this sheep 4 days prior to the actual slaughter of the animal? So Rashi then gives a long explanation where Rashi says that Hashem knew that it was the time for the redemption. And Hashem saw that the Jewish people did not have any merit by which to be redeemed. And in fact, the language of Rashi is that Rabbi Masya ben Charer says, this is a quote from the sentence in Yecheskel, and we actually quote a lot of this in the Haggadah every year on Pesach night. It says, and I passed by you, and I saw you, and behold, it was a time of love. Because it was actually the hour, the time that was appointed that Hashem had sworn, Hashem promised to Abraham that his children would be redeemed. So Hashem sees that this time is coming, and he sees the Jewish people, and they did not have commandments with which to be involved in order that they should be redeemed. And in fact, it says in Yecheskel that they were naked and bare, like we say in the Haggadah. The Jewish people had no commandments. It's as though that they were naked and bare. So Hashem gave to them 2 commandments, the blood of the Pesach and the blood of the circumcision. Those were 2 commandments that Hashem gave to them in order that they should become redeemed. And it says in Yecheskel that Hashem saw us steeped or wallowing in the blood. Hashem saw you, and he saw you wallowing or steeped in your blood, and that actually is 2 bloods, b'damayich. And in fact, the end of that sentence says, I see, and I said, by your blood you will live, by your blood you will live. We repeat that phrase at every circumcision as well. And apparently it's referring to the 2 bloods, one of the Pesach offering and one of circumcision. And because of the fact that they had been steeped in idolatry, Hashem said, withdraw your hands from idolatry, take for yourself the sheep, and do this mitzvah. So that's the language of Rashi. Now there's a lot of questions, and I'll just go through them one by one. Number 1, according to Rashi, it's for this reason that Hashem commanded the people to take the animal 4 days before slaughtering, meaning because they were naked and bare, they had no commandments, they needed something by which to be redeemed. Hashem commanded them to take this offering, apparently 4 days before. But Rashi never explains why specifically 4 days beforehand. Rashi just says that they were commanded to do it in order to remove themselves from idolatry and to have a mitzvah, a commandment by which to be redeemed. Also, it's very interesting that the wording in the Torah is that it should be for you for a safekeeping. It's specifically saying guard it, but why? It doesn't say why guard it for these 4 days. That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, if it's the time that Hashem swore to Abraham that the Jewish people are meant to be redeemed, so it's time to redeem them, and Hashem promised. Why do they need a commandment? Hashem promised that they're going to be redeemed. Why do they need this commandment or the circumcision commandment? Just redeem them. And number 3, it's so fascinating that Rashi brings over here that there are 2 bloods, but the blood of circumcision is never mentioned explicitly in the Chumash. We understand that from Yecheskel and from other places that before they left Egypt they circumcised, from Sefer Yehoshua and other places. But it's so incredible that the Torah itself does not mention that this concept that the Jewish people, I'm saying in Parshas Bo, in our Parsha, doesn't mention that the Jewish people did circumcision that night. And it's also really incredible that they did it at night, when normally circumcision is done during the day. They slaughtered the Pesach offering during the day. They could have done circumcision by the day. That's a very hard question that we're going to try at least to answer somewhat. So the bottom line is that we're trying to understand a few different points. Why did the servants initially complain that Paro has to let the people go, and then they let go of their objection when Paro says, no, only the men can go and you all cannot go? Also, we're asking, when it comes to the money that they were asked to take, why? Why not just give them money or let it come down from heaven or have the Egyptians give it to them? Why is it done in this specific fashion that they ask for it and the Egyptians give it to it? That's also a miracle that the Egyptians, seemingly, that the Egyptians would give them the money. So why is that? And then question number 3 is this whole notion that the Jewish people were supposed to take the lamb 4 days before, and then for some reason they needed this merit in order to be redeemed, when seemingly they were promised that Abraham was promised that his children would be redeemed. And why is it that they have to have it 4 days beforehand if they can just simply take it an hour before and do the slaughter, etc.? And it's also so incredible that we don't find in the Chumash itself that they did the circumcision. So what is going on with all of this? I would like to suggest that this is something that's actually very relevant to our time, specifically everything that we're witnessing in the world today, as follows. Just give me 1 second. Yeah. So, more than the issue of being liberated from oppression is the point of freedom. And that is something that I think we really need to examine, especially in light of what's happening today in every society. To be free and to have no sense of purpose, or even worse, to be nihilistic, is not useful or worse. We have been experiencing freedom here in this United States of America for 200 plus years. And for all of the great qualities of American society, we see the tremendous challenges that are today when people have all this freedom and all this wealth, all this time to complain about things that instead of showing appreciation for the life that they have, they end up hating the very country that is the cause for their freedom. At least, I'm not talking about divine. Of course, we know Hashem is the cause for everything, but they could think that it's this country that has provided them these benefits. And the therefore is, we have to ask ourselves, what is the notion of being free? And is the point of liberating people from oppression that they simply stop being persecuted and oppressed? Or is there a bigger, more important reason for a person to be liberated and free? So very simply put, I would suggest that as far as the Jews of Egypt were concerned, Hashem would certainly liberate the Jews based on his covenant with Abraham, even if they did not have the mitzvah, the commandment of either the Paschal lamb or the circumcision. Hashem made a promise that the Jews will be freed, and Hashem would free them. But the problem is that if he simply liberates the Jews, and the Jews themselves don't know the purpose of being free, then there really is no point to the freedom. There is no benefit, if you will, to the liberation. And the main benefit of being free, this is the way we're going to phrase it now, and then we'll explain. The main benefit of being free is to live. What does it mean to live? So for most people, we think it means to be alive and breathing and hopefully not have sickness and hopefully be able to enjoy. But that's not the Torah's definition of life. From the very outset of the Torah, the concept of living is to be connected in a way that is permanent and infinite by the connection to Hashem. That means to be connected to Hashem in a way that is permanent and infinite is called living, and anything less than that is actually called dead. How do we know that? Because Hashem said explicitly to Adam and Eve, to Adam and Chava, on the day that you eat from this tree, you will die. Now, most of us read that story and say, well, it didn't really mean literally, because we see that Adam himself lived until age 930. And clearly, Chava also lived more time. They had children. and eventually they had Shais. So certainly they lived much more than that day when they transgressed the commandment of Hashem and ate from the tree. So why does the Torah say on that day you will die? Because since their connection to Hashem was no longer concrete and infinite, and it would require great repair and work to get back to that level, that's considered not real living. And that's what I mean by, from the very outset of the Torah, the concept of living is to be connected to Hashem in a way that is permanent and infinite. A beautiful point. I was giving a class several weeks ago in Surfside, and one of the students of the class pointed this out based on a class that we were just doing. When Hashem tells Avraham that Sarah is going to give birth to another son, and his name is Yitzchak, Avraham immediately says, "How I wish Yishmael should live in front of you." Avraham sensed, even at that point, that Yishmael's life, even though he had not done anything wicked yet, was not intrinsically connected to Hashem. And Avraham is davening that just because Yitzchak is born shouldn't prevent Yishmael from having a real bond with Hashem, which is what life is all about. And as Rabbi Yehoshua was pointing out, not being firmly connected is actually a form of death. Now, there is so much that goes into this that's important to understand. Depression is a form of death. Having negativity and complaining and living with angst is a form of death. All these things that Western society has learned to placate themselves with by medication or false pursuits of pleasure, these are all just lighter forms of death. That's not what living is all about, and it's certainly not the reason to be free. So, the essential point is that the purpose of freedom is to live a life whereby we internalize the inspirational joy of being both connected and useful, both connected to Hashem and having Hashem have a use for us. Give me 1 second. Yes. Because by being of service and use to Hashem, so then we truly have divine infinite purpose. So by taking the lamb 4 days before we slaughter it, what we're doing is that we are internalizing a whole paradigm shift of what it means to live. And in order to live, we need to deeply contemplate. We need to introspect on who we are, and we need to contemplate the purpose of living. And we have to remember that the purpose of living will not be provided for by the secular ideologies in which we live, not by the lamb in Egypt, and not by the wealth of any country in which we are lucky enough to be somewhat free, and not by their ideology and their ideas of what does it mean to be a human being, and a man can be a woman and all that garbage. That is not going to serve the purpose of freedom or real living. And that is critical for us to deeply absorb. So the point of taking this lamb 4 days before is to undergo a major paradigm shift whereby we understand that the idolatry in which we have been steeped in Egypt is a false form of living. It's not just, okay, we're committing to not do it. We understand that it's not good. We're going to do what Hashem wants. No, it's much deeper than that. It's that that's what will preserve our dignity, our humanity, and our sense of purpose in life. If we separate ourselves from the false ideologies of what idolatry is, and instead we connect to the divine and we find a purpose in that, then we will really be living. And that's why Hashem said, as it's recorded in the Haggadah, and it's a quote from Sefer Yechezkel, and I said, by your blood you will live. by your blood you will live. It's not simply a merit that Hashem liberates us because we did those commandments, but it's the sense of purpose and dignity that we get that gives us a sense of vitality, that's real living. And that takes time to absorb. It takes introspection. It takes major commitment, a willingness to show the Egyptians that we were willing to slaughter it. As we know, that 4 days before it was Shabbos, we call it Shabbos HaGadol. That's when we really demonstrated that we were aligning ourselves with a whole different priority list of purpose to life and living. So we have to reject these false notions of idolatry of the secular world, and we have to recognize that those are very transient and false. And it's important to understand at this point that that's what preserves us, and therefore when the Torah says, and it will be for you for a safe keeping, I suggest it doesn't only mean it will be for you for a safe keeping, you'll guard this animal for 4 days and then you'll slaughter it, you have to watch it. It means it's what's going to preserve you and your sense of well-being and true life and vitality. It will be for you. It will safeguard you. And once we made that commitment in Egypt and then eventually received the Torah, that becomes our permanent identity, and therefore we don't need to do that every year. Ever since the Torah is given, and we merited that by self-identifying here on this night of the redemption in Egypt, then the whole definition of being a Jew is to be permanently connected to the divine in an indelible fashion as represented, for example, by circumcision, and also the commitment to reject the false ideologies of the world, which we're going to talk about more in 1 second, which is slaughtering their lamb. It's also, Ramban points out beautifully that the constellation for the month of Nisan is a sheep, the Tlet. And that is a way of saying that we don't have to be subject to astrology either, and that the true power that's in charge of everything is Hashem, and so therefore we slaughter that, and ultimately that we want to serve Hashem in our freedom, but not because we owe it to Hashem, of course we do, and not because he's telling us to do it, which we should listen to because he's the creator, etc., which is also true, but mostly because we understand that this is how we truly live. Now, there's several more points to discuss here. One is that normally we do all over the Torah, we do circumcision before the Pesach offering. And in fact, the person is not allowed to eat from a Pesach offering if they haven't yet done circumcision. But in the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim, on this day that the Jews left Egypt, the 14th by day is when they slaughtered the Pesach offering, and according to the rabbis, the 15th that night is when they did circumcision, so the order is reversed. So it's really fascinating to note that normally circumcision must precede the offering of the Pesach lamb, and why in Egypt is this done in the reverse order? So I suggest that in Egypt it was first necessary, because of our being attached to idolatry, we first had to reject that. In other words, a way to think of it is that first Abraham recognized that there was a God. He lived a life of service to God. And then 99 years later, he's blessed with the commandment of circumcision and he becomes permanently attached to God. But he lived a life of the rejection of idolatry and instead with the recognition of the one Hashem. But because in Egypt we had been involved in idolatry, first we needed to reject the idolatry by being ready to take their God and slaughter it, and then actually slaughtering it on the 14th by day. And then the night of the 15th, we declared that the whole purpose of living is with the blood of the circumcision, because that is our indelible marker of being bonded with Hashem. And especially, we know that it takes place in the physical part of the body, and it really makes clear the notion that spirituality is what is most important, not physicality. So we first needed to shed our secular and Egyptian identity, and then that night we needed to prepare for actual leaving, not because we needed a merit, but because we needed to step into real living, which is to be truly bonded permanently with Hashem and undertake that relationship as the permanent identity of us as a people. And also, it happens to be that circumcision is a covenant which is not only our commitment to Hashem, but it's Hashem's commitment to us. But on the night of Pesach, we're not talking about Hashem's commitment to us. And the truth is, one of the beautiful distinctions between serving Hashem and Lahavdil al Favdalos, right, a million miles away, to compare that to idol worship, is that serving Hashem is never transactional. It's a choice that we choose Hashem. We want a relationship with Him. Hashem chooses us. Hashem wants a relationship with us. And it's true that in order for there to be a covenant, we both have to commit to that. But the night of Pesach, we were not doing circumcision as a way of demonstrating that Hashem is choosing a relationship with us. We were doing circumcision as a way of demonstrating that we were choosing that that's the only way to be free. And therefore, it would be done even by night because it's not the normal covenantal relationship that we talk about with Hashem. It's a declaration of our identity. So, when Paro's servants say, Egypt is going to be lost if you don't let these people go, they're not wrong. They're going to experience tremendous destruction and devastation if the Jews stay in Egypt and the locusts indeed plague them. But more important than their comfort, their living even, and not being destroyed, is the ideology for which they stand. And that's true by most people. As in, for example, the regime in Iran. More important to them than their survival is that they stand by their ideology because that's all they know. That's their identity. They cannot conceive of a world where Israel, the Jewish people, are supposed to or allowed to and then supposed to exist. That's not possible for them. They have never, ever moved off that agenda that Israel must be destroyed. So they're willing to completely self-destruct. Here we have weeks and weeks of planning of military strategy against them. What are they doing? Blocking the internet. Nobody knows what's going on in the country. And who knows what they're doing, hunkering down in holes or whatever. Why not just make a treaty, make a deal, do something for yourselves, not to mention your people? And the answer is because that's their ideology. That's their identity. They cannot think of themselves other than the people who hate and need to destroy Israel and the Jews. That's what they are. That's their identity. So when the slaves initially say to Paro, let them go, they're only willing to let them go based on the idea that, okay, this time, at this point in time, the Jewish God is apparently stronger than our gods. We just experienced these 7 plagues, and apparently these Jews have something with their God that they can do things against us. Okay, let them go. We'll live to fight another day. But that is only true if the Jewish people are worshiping God the way that the Egyptians worship their false gods, which is that you serve your God, he's powerful, he does things for you. So in this case, the Jews are serving their God in the minds of the Egyptians. I'm saying the Jews are serving their God, he's doing things for them. Okay, that's what we call a transactional relationship. That's what idolatry always is. We sacrifice something important to us, and you, the powerful God, give something that's important to us in return. But when Paro asks them who's going to go serve, and they say our kids are going, the youngest ones are going, the oldest ones are going, that means even people who don't have what to sacrifice, don't have what to give, are somehow involved in serving a God. That means it's not a transactional relationship where you give something and the God gives something in return. It means it's a real relationship where you're living in connection, in closeness, in union with the God. That's an ideology that the Egyptians simply cannot tolerate. And they say, we can't live in a world where it's possible to have a genuine relationship with the divine. That's something we simply cannot tolerate, because then it means our whole ideology is false. and therefore they don't protest. Not now and not later. According to the Midrash, they may be protested by the plague of the firstborn, but as you see from here, they're willing to undergo destruction in order to claim their ideology, which is their identity. And the reverse is that the Jews must claim their identity and ideology in order for there to be a purpose to their freedom. And finally, once we Jews understand that our whole way of relating to Hashem with our youngers and our olders is a way to live that is full of inspiration and joy and connection and meaning and purpose, we understand that we are a dignified people. We are not simply looking to be free. We are looking to live lives of meaning and consequence. And that's what money is for. Money is to give us the ability to do more meaningful and impactful things in the world, whether it's to build schools and yeshivos, or it's to help the needy, or it's to build other institutions that our nation and the world needs. That's the purpose of money, to invest in ourselves, to be able to create more and to build more. That's what money is for. And we need to know that we deserve to have that money. And we should have that money. And we should participate in getting that money. And that the people that have oppressed us and have abused us, whether you want to call it reparations or you want to call it simply wages for work, that's something that comes to dignified people that have a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. And so therefore the construct of the money is not simply get money to feel better, get money so that you can have a means of sustenance later. That can come in any form. But the concept of money that says that our freedom is truly something purposeful and that we're not merely escaping from slavery, but we're stepping into a new paradigm of liberation, which means dignified purpose, that's something that deserves a great wealth that we then take with us to do great things. And that's the purpose of asking for money. And Hashem allows the Egyptians to see the greatness of the Jews. Rabbi Chiel actually wrote me something on this earlier, which I think is beautiful, that the Egyptians were able to sense this greatness within the Jewish people. That's what it means. The pain of the people was able to be found by the Egyptians. They were actually able to sense this dignity and this purpose of living and being. And so I think that what we really have to take out from all of this as pertains to today is that one of the reasons that it's so difficult to change regimes is because these nations do not have clear identity, meaning, and purpose. They don't themselves know enough what they're fighting for other than having been oppressed and controlled and abused. And that's not really enough of a reason to be free, because then when you're free, what's to stop you from becoming dictators and people that are also going to seek to possibly abuse or take advantage of other people? Unless you live a life that is in connection with the divine and you recognize that you are created in the image of Hashem, and what Hashem wants is that people should thrive. Hashem wants that people should have a relationship with him. Hashem wants that the purpose of freedom should be to build, to be creative, to be generous, to be caring, and to be empathic. If you don't understand that, it's not really good to be free, because you can end up, which is what we see so much in our decadent societies today, with lives of depression, lives of pleasure seeking, and just satisfying lusts and temptations instead of lives of meaning and purpose and giving. And so when in Sefer Yecheskel it says, and I said, by your blood you will live, by your blood you will live, it means that's really how you're going to live with a sense of inspiration and vitality. That's what real living is, but that only comes from being connected to Hashem. So the blood of the Pesach offering, and that's why, by the way, it doesn't say these two commandments, it says blood, because blood is living. It says when you understand that the blood of the Pesach offering is meant to demonstrate that real living is not about transactional relationships with a power. It's not about trying to get something in return so that you have good wealth and good agriculture and so that you can then satisfy your lusts and temptations. It's actually about feeling bonded with Hashem, like when you do circumcision and you present as a person that identifies as I live in constant recognition of my connection with Hashem. That's what real living is about. And that is actually what will preserve us. That's what will give us happiness, even in these tumultuous times. That's what gives us inspiration. That's what gives us courage. That's what gives us motivation to actually fight for our way of living, both in the United States, across the world, and especially in Israel and Eretz Yisrael. We need Jews to understand that that's the purpose of Jewish. The purpose of Jewish is Jewish living. It's not so that we can survive. It's so that we can live in connection with Hashem. Any questions or comments? Okay.
Thanks, Akira.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, I'm just talking to him.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, Veronica.
Thank you.
Actually, yes.
Rabbi Yechiel?
Yes. You've answered the very interesting question that can be asked that it's like the elephant in the room. When you start learning about the Exodus, you see nothing about this idea of coming to Har Sinai except that Hashem told that to Moshe. But in terms of the Avos, look back at the promise of the Avos. It doesn't say that they're going to become, a Jewish nation where they're going to get the Torah, etc. It's only introduced later on when they're being freed. And the point you're making is well taken in terms of, hello, everybody. You know what this freedom is really all about? And that's why it's introduced at this time, because, it's no sense to just be free for the purpose of being free. In other words, if you listen to all the rhetoric from, when after 9/11 and all that, and even now, this on the radios with liberty, liberty means nothing unless you have a purpose. Yet they just keep talking with that silly nonsense of liberty and freedom and hello, just to do whatever the heck you want to do. That's the real problem.
I like what you're saying. So I like your question very much about why isn't it mentioned to the forefathers? And you're saying it's coming now because we need to know the purpose of freedom. But I would just add that it's highlighting even to the Avos, if to the forefathers what it said is that you're going to come to Sinai and you're going to receive the Torah. I think what we could think is that the reason that we're going to be free is because we're going to accept that. And even though, yes, we have to accept the Torah, the reason that we're going to be free is because Hashem wants to have a relationship with us and he wants us to have a relationship with him. And the promise of Eretz Yisrael, which is what most of those promises are about, is about the fulfillment of living together with Hashem. And the Torah, of course, is part of that, but we should understand that the purpose is the relationship, not something else.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Yechiel. Thank you for all your help. Anyone else? We're good for today? Okay, perfect. You
didn't address also my other question the first question.
I didn't see that. I'm sorry. Let's see. So 1 second. I didn't see that. Hang on. Yeah, I did not answer that today. It needs more explanation that I think we can do in a few seconds. Yeah, that's a good question about how do Chazal know that we were steeped in idolatry, and especially if we're going to say that this is after the 4/5 or whatever happened in the plague of darkness. To say that these Jews were steeped in idolatry is difficult indeed, especially after 9 plagues.
Yes.
Right. So I don't think it means that at all. Yeah. So we'll God willing, we'll talk about it. Yeah. Yeah. Great question. Rav Mordechai, you have your hand raised?
Rabbi. Like you always see these UJF stuff or whatever it is. Let my people go.
Yeah.
But they never do the last part of the Parsha, so they can serve me. And
exactly.
Real freedom is in serving.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the same thing applies when they say tikkun
Tikkun
olam. They never
olam.
say l'sakin olam b'malchut shakai. They always skip the second part.
Yep, exactly right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Everyone have a super day. Oh yeah, please, my father will be giving a class. Please zoom over to that.